take a breath and get centered. And I I wanted to have this space with you because I'm in the middle of a big process, and it's about my sexual energy. And since about September, I decided that I would go through this sort of decontamination process where I don't touch women really. I don't give hugs. I don't look at them in the eyes. And it's about going cold turkey on my my survival strategies of using my sexual energy to to be safe, to get what I want, to connect, to essentially create this web around me that makes me important or makes me likable. And I know that obviously in Judaism, there's this practice in more orthodox traditions called shomer negia, which is, basically a total separation between men and women, except for certain exceptions. And one day, early on in this process, it was late at night. I was in Miami and I walked by a rabbi, and I thought, God, I really just want to ask him. We're in Miami. There's like sexual energy all over the place. It's like a sort of a nest for what we call white widows, or people who really use their sexual energy to move through the world, like as their main resource, which I am one of them, and a lot of people are. And it's perfect timing for this call because I just got out of a yoga class. I didn't even shower because I just wanted to get straight onto this call. And I noticed how throughout the whole yoga class, part of my energy and attention is with the yoga teacher. First I scan, first night this sexual energy, like part of me scans the whole room, knows where the women are, where the men are, kind of maps it out energetically, and then decides if the yoga teacher is worth my time. And then part of my attention's with, how is she viewing me? What does she think about me? How's my practice? Is she gonna come and touch me? And okay, all of this to ask you, and explore, within your experience of the Jewish tradition, what have you learned, and what can you share about your own journey in this domain?
Well, I want to begin with that I welcome this conversation and I wish more people would have it. Like what's coming up for me is the amount of men and women I've wanted to have a version of this conversation with that they won't. And so just I just want to call that up because that is coming up for me, how like doing this a long time. I definitely always saw the channeling of the Jewish call of Shomer Negia. The real word is not Shomer Negia. I didn't grow up with those words. The word was Yichud. Yichud means aloneness. And the biggest and I found it interesting that in the world I grew up in, which is significantly mystically channeled version of Judaism, I never heard the words in school, in yeshiva, in my home of Shomer Negia. Like Shomer Negia is like saying rules, that the Torah gives commandments. But the word mitzvah doesn't mean a commandment. Mitzvah means a connection. It means to connect with something. Even in the army, when they give you a mitzvah to do something, it's not a commandment. This is the protocol on the top, whether you know it or not. generally speaking, you don't know what the bigger picture is. That's reserved for the higher ups. And then it's channeled down within connecting links and strategies and systems so that you can actually succeed at the part that is important for you to, and climbing those ranks and executing on the missions. So calling it Shomer Nagia just puts it into the category to me of commandments. And then those words you linked with, I see in Orthodox communities. I don't think there's something called Orthodox Judaism. I certainly don't think there's something called ultra Orthodox Judaism, let alone Reform Conservative. Judaism to me is Judaism and mystical Judaism. Those are the only two, because there's Judaism, just this is what it is, and do what you want to do, essentially. Find your connection to the Creator in your authentic way. God knows there's unlimited in Judaism of ways to call it into your life, because it spans every hour, every minute of every day of the year, and everything from putting on your clothes to getting out of bed to taking a shower. Everything is included. It's a total construct for everything. But mystical Judaism is the same exact thing, except with the caveat of everything is a construct to bring the divine in a more consciously, intentionally close space. And the secret is not such a secret. It's always there anyway. It's been there the whole time. It's just about uncovering that there is. So bad Jew, far Jew, unclose, the Kiruv movement, all of it is not Judaism, and it's certainly not mystical Judaism, because each and everything that you do, if you do it because you like, hey, I'd like to do that, so there's a form of authenticity and integrity layer to it, that's personal. And since all of life is relationship, everything there, I mean, the whole world. So in mystical Judaism, you would only call it yichud anyways, because yichud means aloneness. And the goal of aloneness is to feel that alone, like you're never alone. You're with the divine energy in yourself and outside yourself. And so you're one with what's happening. Now, the question of sex is only a big question because sex is the ultimate human tool for aloneness, for yichud. And when you look in the Torah, the words used in it, in halacha, they certainly call it yichud, which basically means pure, intertwined connection. You know, it's like, are you yichud with that person? When does yichud start? When does yichud stop? I'll put that on hold for a second, because that's where we're going to go. And the other term that you'll see in the Torah for sex is das. Das is a very interesting term to use for that, because das could mean awareness. Das means communication. I translate true communication as tolerance, where I truly tolerate the other individual. So what I'm giving them is going to be totally encompassing what they are and who they are, so that it's for them. So to me, it says, like Isaiah says, that when the Messianic era is going to be known because the world will be filled with knowledge. Like he says, Humala haaretz dea, and the world will be filled with dea. So it's not knowledge as information, it's dea as communication, connection, tolerance. So it says in the Torah, V'ha'adam yada es Chava, Adam knew Eve. Says Rashi, they had sex. So there's these two ideas around sex are das and yichud. We're going to focus on the yichud one because it's a little less mystical and a little more, I think, direct to what you're experimenting with at the moment. So in yichud, when they, okay, are we good?
I just want
yeah,
to check in for a second, because I'm glad that you gave the context from which you're speaking, which is more mystical Judaism and not, not a rule based or a more strict. You are, I see you as someone who practices a very deep form of Judaism, but it's not a religious Judaism, it's a mystical Judaism. And I also heard you ask this question: how to have more of these conversations with men and women? And I want to just give a little bit more about how I came into this process, which is, I've known about this process for a long time, and I could not enter it. I could not enter into this, you know, decontaminating the way I use my sexual energy in everyday life because it wasn't painful enough. Consciously painful enough for me to go into it. It wasn't, I didn't have enough of a knowing of you use this word das, of a knowing about how much it was creating chaos and destruction in my life until I was in training spaces were so clear and sharp, and where people are so deeply invited to give strong, clear, um, like uncensored feedback, that I heard from so many women over and over again how much what I was doing was just toxic. And it got so big and so intense for me that I said, of course I'm going to do this. I need this. I know that I need this. And I only got it through that clarity from others in relating, in a style of communication that is so um unfiltered, in a safe space it was made for unfiltered feedback, that I got to say, oh shit, you know, this is real. It's not just this little thing. It's a really big thing. And if I want to be in that connection to source, which is in the connection to all, then I have to clean this up.
Well, that's very, very, very true, especially when you are in positions of leading these circles. It's hard to understand how strong the transference is, especially with people who are looking for a strong mate and not even, survivalistically and evolutionary. They just simply have had so many weak relationships.
Hmm.
And you speak from a space of authority and a space of conviction. People want to be devoted to people who have conviction in the moment. So the transference is strong. So there's definitely I appreciate the awareness, and I do know, I'm quite aware that that's why people don't have this conversation. I think very, very much when I do have these conversations, I think of these men in San Francisco. I'm walking down the street probably around midnight, coming from a long class and talk and different things. And I see two guys in my community walking together, and I'm like, hey, what are you up to? And they're both in their mid 30s at the time, and they had both independently told me that they're looking for a real mate at that point in their life. And they're like, oh, we were on a double date. I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know you guys were dating. They're like, no, it was our first date. I was like, all right. Why? They're like, whatever. That's what people do. I was like, I got to be honest, I'm offended. Like, why are you offended? I was like, because you both told me literally in the last month that you want to mate. Did
Hmm.
you look in the mirror before you left the house and said, hey, I may meet my soulmate tonight? No, you didn't do that. Did you go on a date where you like genuinely took a moment to absorb the human being? No, you were four people. You can't do that in a setting of four people. So to be honest, it's like I feel like you guys are kind of using me, coming to me, taking my energy, asking me about something, and then I have to like bump into you on the street, and you guys are almost like this, avoiding me, and like, dude, I don't care what you do. You're a human being. You're on your journey, but like, I'm gonna call you out before you go on a date with another human being. Minimum, look in the mirror and say, "Hey, this could be the person I want to have children with," and approach it with reverence. There will be plenty of time for play, but it's got to start there. And I think that's really what the yichud thing is. It's starting from a point of reverence. It sounds a tiny bit like the point you're starting with is a little further back from that, which is boundaries for yourself in such a way that you can actually get to that place. So you've swung it way back. And I only have countless of names come to mind of traditionally righteous, holy men who avert their eyes and are at great distance from the opposite sex for many spiritual purposes. But in the mystical surroundings I grew up with, that kind of ended with my grandfathers, with my grandparents' generation.
Mm.
Like definitely I heard recently of a very, very important figure in my life, a really incredible man who went through quite a bit, the gulags in Russia in World War II. And he said, I was talking to another guy who was very influenced by him, a deeply Hasidic mystic, a real mystic. And he told me, "Oh, you know this guy?" I was like, "Yeah, I did. I remember when I was a kid." And he said, "Well, he came to LA to fundraise for Chabad, and that's what he did in his older years. And he was in synagogue, and he said, 'Do you want to?'" And he said, "Can you give me a ride?" And I said, "Sure." And we came out to the car, and it was my wife driving. He's like, "I don't drive. I don't even have a license." So my wife came to pick us up, and I see him standing there. He wouldn't get in the car. And I said, "Why wouldn't you get in the car?" And he said, "Well, I've never been in a car where a woman drove. I can't do that today."
Mm.
And it was like, like a part of me was like repulsed. Like, dude, come on, where's the limit? And a part of me was like, he was 80 years old. He wasn't making shifts at this point. When they were kids, cars came out essentially, and in that, driving a car was kind of like this, like either it was hard work or it was more frivolity. It was like not a necessity. Everybody grew up without it. So the idea of like that to him was at the same level of listening to a woman sing. It's just something he never would allow himself to do. So, which brings me to the yichud itself. In the code, called the Shulchan Aruch, the long table, laying it out, all these ideas, it's really a conversation of where does this begin? In the Talmud, it begins with being secluded, which means being in a space that nobody else knows you're there. You're in a house, you're in an office, you're in a room, you're in a car, and it's closed, and nobody sees in or out, and it's just you two. Even if it's completely innocent, that's called yichud. You're in alone time with someone's space. There is no such rule of don't look in their eyes and don't look at them. That are people who are taking on versions for themselves. It really begins with seclusion. And it's an interesting place to begin with. That where does intimacy begin? Intimacy begins with occupying a space where nobody else occupies that space.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, it would be a lot of understanding of like, oh, there's people I'm supposed to occupy space with, and then there's the divine I'm supposed to occupy space with. And when I enter a place that is not appropriate for me, it's going to compromise my divine connection. That would be simply the idea that connection would take away from the divine connection. Now, that would be the oldest rule I know in regards to the yichud category, is seclusion. Later on, it became touching or things like that. It also became very Latin on like women wearing the most modest version of clothing for that time. And there's a version of modest clothing for men too, etc., etc. I kept every single element of that for essentially until last retreat. And on the way to last retreat, I told my wife that I think I'm going to start hugging women after all these years. I've never had another woman. I got married young. It's not a sexually charged thing for me. It's simply I'm entering into a domain where I'm not in a synagogue anymore. I'm meeting people where they're at. And it's becoming way too difficult for me to start splitting the sex for my own needs when I'm not upholding any specific strain of tradition. Now, someone said, "What do you mean? You still identify in your own mind as Chabad?" I mean, I'm not in public, I guess, anymore, but definitely as a human being, all my books are Chabad related, and my Rebbe's on the wall, and like this is who I am, and I'm 7-8 generations into this, so it's not. There's no internal conflict with that. There's just simply I'm moving in a direction of my own direction. And as I go in that direction, I just couldn't do it anymore. And
So
even when I cleared, like, oh, you've seen rabbis do it when no one's around, I already sacrificed money, power, success in San Francisco for many years. If I just shook that woman's hand, that innocent little shake, if I just gave her a little hug, like everyone else in the room, I would have gotten my funds. I would have gotten but it kept me away.
hold on,
And I
hold on.
have no.
one second.
Yeah. So I'm just finishing that thought.
Yeah,
So I
go
have
on.
no qualms about that. So it's interesting to me that the way I see it is that I'm looking to see at this point about keeping a version of this that keeps me in the yichud mindset as well. And that's been a very interesting journey.
Wait, a few short questions. So you have kept this yichud for your virtually your whole life until about a year ago.
Literally a year ago.
How old are you?
42.
Okay, so 41 years. You were in this energy. So you've been sort of this has been your whole life, has
Yeah.
been in this real clarity about your how you relate with women.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also said that, yeah, if you would have just shook the hand or given the hug, that you would have gotten more of the things that you needed. And this is exactly
Yeah.
what I'm talking about, that this is how most people run their whole life. I mean, you have not, right? You were living under a different set of ethics, or whatever code, a different code, a code that does not exist in modern culture for the most part. It's just a free for all, and most people bring their childhood strategies into adulthood. And if you look the right way, if you give the right smile, mommy or daddy will give you, what you want, and we bring this on. And so it's amazing to me that you just said, if I would have just given the handshake or given the hug, I would have gotten what I needed or what I wanted. And instead, you didn't. You kept your integrity in your practice, in your code, and you are where you are now, which is not, somewhere else, which is not in the success path. You're still in the path of you, which I find is a admirable quality of integrity. I admire that.
Thank you. I
By
mean,
by modern culture standards, you're
yeah,
not winning, but I don't
no.
I don't measure on that metric. I don't measure on that metric anymore. That's another reason why this process that I'm in is so important, and why I want to learn more from you about why have you, why what has it been like for you, and what have you discovered, and what would you say to men? What would you say? I say mostly to men because women are women, and they have their own process and their own world that we never understand. But more for men, like why? Like what's so important about this?
Men in a short summary need to know what they're calling in with their energy. They're so used to thinking they don't, and that it's women calling in the energy with their femininity, which is generally true. They are the vessel representing the highest point of existence, and men are more of an energy and a giving energy, so they want to give into the vessel. But they are still a vessel, and men are still women. In other words, they're still a vessel too, needing light and needing to birth their ideas that gestate.
Mhm.
And so, just like a woman, you would say a lot of what they do has a lot to do with what you're calling in, right? And in Miami, they're actually calling it in as their asset, their proverbial asset. Men are not really ever given an idea that they actually are calling in other energy into their being, and are thus want to know how they ended up in a situation where they thought was just okay or just benign, and it turns out to be super complicated, and they get super stuck. The first time I did ayahuasca, I did not totally fully understand this because I was so new with hugging. It was like so new to me because it was after the retreat, so it was less than a year ago. My
Mm.
first. Since then I've done it a dozen times, but I'm saying, um, I'm working with it. But the first time I didn't understand, and I had this like I have all the wisdom and all this information, but I had no practice to understand what that works. I've never had girlfriends, never went through this cycle. This was part of my life my whole life.
Yeah.
And I remember dancing under the moonlight during my first Ayah journey, and a voice shows up and it goes, be careful what you're drawing in, parrots. And I'm like, of course I'm careful what I'm drawing in. I'm the master of this language. What are you telling me draw in? I know exactly what I draw in. I know I'm a boundaries. I get love. I know all the wisdom. I'm really high on my own supply. And it's like, no, no, be careful what you draw in. And what I had not thought about was I've never just danced under the moonlight. This is a new place with new people. And all of a sudden, a woman who I know to be looking deeply for a relationship and feeling like she's against the clock and all that type of stuff. And it was not somebody I knew well at all. I just met her 2 days ago. All of a sudden, she comes floating out of the circle and starts dancing with me. I'd never had that. And I was like, whoa, I just called that in. I had no idea. And they don't know that there's any boundaries with me because I hugged them and shook their hand like everyone else. Usually there's like clear, I don't even bother with that guy. There's all these things that he does. Now you don't see it. I don't even wear a wedding ring. So like there's no sign anymore. Oh my gosh, now this wisdom that I've only shared with others, it's time for me to learn it because I need to know what I'm calling in when I'm calling it in. In other words, maybe day 4 I could dance under the moonlight when people have a clearer idea of me, but night 1, there's got to be some space where people understand that you're not available and this is not what you are. So that's kind of where we're going with Yichud. Like the boundaries are also a way of you telling your story. They're a way of you expressing like where your integrity is. In the halachic non-mystical, it would be saying where your ethics are. In one of my closest friends over here, a woman, won't have sex outside of real relationship. That's her thing. And like, I'm just always so blown away because what do you mean? Don't you have days where you are with somebody you just met and you are like, I haven't had sex in months and I would love to like have an experience and this person's open and we're happy. And it's like, no, relationship, which means we're in some mutual agreement about what this relationship is. And so these things have been around me my whole life, but I've never taken notice because my boundaries were so wide. I mean, I wouldn't have coffee meetings with somebody unless it was at a coffee shop where people knew me. I wouldn't go to a place where no one knows me and meet a woman. Felt wrong because like, what message am I sending? I needed to be somewhere where somebody could say, Rabbi, what's going on? Parrots, how are you? And if I couldn't find a place, they'd have to meet me at my house where I have wife and kids around. I just, not because I have or don't have sexual urges, it's because what is the goal of my relationship is very, very important. And I'm learning that now as well in a new business form and a new model that I'm doing. What is the goal of the relationship? Every relationship is a miniature expression of creation. Everyone. If the mystics take us all the way back, why would infinity create finite? Because infinity cannot have a relationship with infinity. It needs something that isn't it in order to have a relationship with. So that means the whole entire spark that makes it all happen is relationship, which means every single relationship is a kind of recreation of the forces of creation and life source. So if every time you meet someone, especially new, there's a life source chain reaction, how important is it to really think about that in those type of environments? Because if we're in the world building business and the making the world better and creating like that, dignity is at the interface between everything. So that's where I'm finalizing this with you, is that in this development, the word that needs to come to mind between relationships is dignity. And dignity represented by the Sphira of Malchut for another time. But because I'm not so sure if the averting eyes and the going so far is sustainable. Because are you really learning? You're protecting your energy, you're holding on to your seed, you're creating beautiful boundaries, but you're essentially in warrior mode. You're not in living life mode. The warrior is extreme with their boundaries because it's life and death.
Mm-hmm.
But the world we're in is life and life. And in life and life, my relationships are important, even ones that are subtle. So now it's more about the onus is on me to have deep intention with all interaction. And that's the dignity thing. Do I bring dignity? So if I avert my eyes in this situation, perhaps I'm actually I'm offending that person. Well, that's not the right time to do it. That's how Parrot sees it. If I'm gonna turn down a handshake, I don't see everybody, give me a hug. I just don't turn it down anymore because I don't feel like I'm bringing dignity anymore in that relationship. And I tried it on a few times, and I'm currently in it for a year, and it's currently making me feel much better about myself and being in my body, something I struggled with. And also in the last 2 years of psychedelic work, I lost 75 pounds and re-entered my body and found the body that's been gone since some trauma at 7 years old, and realized like it's all part of the narrative for me. And the voice in my head that said nobody wants to touch you anyways because you're fat was actually keeping me away from the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a body that works great and I think is beautiful. Now I'm sitting by the beach on a day, or I'm like that, and all of a sudden I'm in this new world that was not the world I'm from. And now I have to go to the core of my teachings, which is, am I creating dignity in this connection? Or is there ulterior motive? And by knowing that there's always an ulterior motive, I'm a man. So now I really know that if I want to be honest with my integrity and my authenticity and my ethics and my values, it better be a dignified expression that happens. So there's no connection unless it's needed. And if it's needed, integrity is my baseline of how, not integrity, dignity is my baseline of how the interaction should go.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I I'm really glad that you're trying something different. It's like I can relax in relating with you, knowing that you're not committed, or it's not committed. It's like you are not living within the walls of some dogma, you know? And I love that. I'm really glad about that. And I'm also I feel sad about what you shared about your body. And I feel sad because one thing I've discovered by doing processes about this, about my own sexual energy, is that I discovered that I have lived my whole life as if my body was not mine, as if my body was just available for anybody to do with it whatever they wanted. Because when I was young, I was it's hard to say this. It's like I was violated. Like my energetic space was constantly violated by people that didn't know any better. You know, they weren't violating me out of wanting to abuse me or wanting to fulfill some sexual. It wasn't that. It wasn't sexual abuse or overt sexual, physical abuse. It was more of a unconscious abuse where it's like my body was just available for their hands and their touching at will. And that's most of how modern culture goes. Like a little kid is just at the whim of everybody's touch and like grabbing, and it's all in good, intention, whatever. But it's what I realized, that I made a decision in order to make sense of all this. Okay, my body is not mine. My body is not mine, and I can give it away at will. Well, since my body's not mine, I can give it away at will to get what I want, to get love, to get approval, to be taken care of. And so for me, this is a 1 year cleanup process where I
Mm,
don't do these things because I need to get my dignity back.
mm,
And okay, everybody, relating dignity is a big principle of relating. I totally agree with you. I think it's an essential element. And
Mm.
there's also this phase for me right now, which is about, okay, I need my own dignity first. And so not
Mm.
looking at women in the eyes, it's not like it's not turning away. It's just I pick a different point because a lot of the sexual energy I draw from my eyes. Like I can with my eyes, with my gaze, I can unconsciously do a lot of manipulation. So this is about and what I you know what I've learned? That I am absolutely incompetent in relating if I don't have these weapons, these tools. And so yeah, it is warrior mode right now. It's like total warrior mode, and it's warrior mode, and I'm like fighting to get to the castle to save my dignity, to rescue my dignity from wherever, where I left it a long time ago. And it's hard to talk about this because most people won't get it. They will not get this. And they'll be like, oh my God, I feel so sorry for him. But for anyone who hears this, I want you to take a really big, like hard look. It's like maybe there is some element of this that is you also. And
Yeah.
and yeah, I wish for everybody to, especially, it's just certain we've talked a lot about energy in this conversation. You've brought up a lot about energy and what you call in. And also certain places in the world have certain energies and they draw in a certain kind of person who, so places like Miami where I spent 15 years of my life, places like, there's certain places that they're like hubs for people who want and benefit greatly from their sexual energy being the driver of their life. And I really see how, you know, I have all my things about religion, but how some of these practices really cultivate an integrity and a dignity that even if it seems dogmatic or, you know, whatever zombie like, it really there's a very deep mystical purpose behind it. And I want to keep having these conversations because I want to keep learning more about myself and more about this and open doorways for other people to consider that maybe what they're calling in is a result of some childhood part that still trying to get mommy, to love them and to give them what they want instead of the principles of dignity, creation, integrity. I've been writing down some of the principles that have come through from your words, devotion. Instead of sourcing your life from childhood survival strategies, sourcing from these principles, from dignity, from creation, from integrity, from devotion. These are such beautiful places to source life from and source
Yeah.
relating. So
Mm.
yeah, and
Yeah. Well, I really think the front lines for this conversation is the term Malchut. And it represents, in old school, they just kept saying, oh, Malchus is God as king. I'm like, well, it's actually whatever you think it is, that's what every person has. Because the point of God is an emulation, a mirror to our construct. Created in the divine image means we have divine qualities. So if my divine quality that I'm trying to assert is a sense of sovereignty, because a king has sovereignty, well, guess what? Sovereignty is an expression of dignity. When somebody violates my space, they violate my sovereignty. And in reclamation projects, because on some level, mysticism is like restoration ecology, seeing the interactiveness
mm,
of how things need to repurpose to regrow. and what type of replenishment it is to get to the indigenous space that they're from instead of the invasive self. So there's an invasive self that's needing to be cleaned out with dignity, and that invasive self needs dignity too. So we often like discard something because it's bad, but it is also a sovereign thing that attached to you and needs dignity. So in this process of reclaiming self, the question of dignity is on both sides, and both on how I'm creating that boundary, and also how I'm now implementing this to restore my own. And that's a meaningful personal exercise for each of us to have, and for each of us to go through. And on some level, I'm going through that in a whole new way, and so are you. So that's why I brought up warrior mode, because whenever we begin something, we'd like to begin from love, but that's only if we can summon our inner child. But if our inner child was wounded, we can't summon from love. We have to first summon from essentially discipline. But the discipline is eventually going to need love as well, because love, the opposite of love, some people like to say is hate. Some people like to say is indifference. The opposite of love is boundaries. And boundaries and love, when they finally sync, they create beauty. And that's what we're after. To beautify this world, we need a beautiful balance of love and boundaries. And the way we access that is with this powerful tool of dignity and sovereignty.
Mm.
So I think about this a lot. I feel honored to share it with you. And I also need to go because all my children came rolling into the house, and they're yelling from the other room. And my wife just texted me she had to run out, so I got to get 10 to the flock. But on some level to be continued. And I just want to say that I appreciate the conversation deeply. It's the one I like having the most.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Paris. I'm enjoying the way we're relating and what we're creating, even in just these few short conversations. And I'll bring some more proposals of other topics to explore, because I think they're important. Not because you are some whatever religious guru or something mystical guru, but because you've had experiences that most people have not, and a lot of people have not. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to be unearthed and distributed from the experiences that you've had. And yeah.
Thank you.